we hear these words. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, the women went to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but the man said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Humanity must be handed over to the hands of sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe him. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen clothes by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. Thus ends the reading of the word for this morning.
Happy Easter, Metro. Thank you, Sarah Day, and your beautiful Easter bonnet for that beautiful reading. Thank God for this beautiful worship service that we've already had this morning. I feel like the pressure is totally off me at this point because I think the message has already been delivered. And I don't know about you, but I could hear Sarah Day talk about those women proclaimers all day long. The first proclaimers of the good news. So make sure to, as we tell and retell this story, to make sure that we say that again, those women told the message, and say it loud enough for our Southern Baptists and our evangelical and some other neighbors to hear. Why do you look for the living among the dead? Metro, we have made it through all the emotions of Holy Week to gather here for this triumphant day. We have waved palms in bittersweet celebration of Jesus' final entry into Jerusalem. We have broken bread and poured wine to remember the last meal that Jesus ever had. We have bowed our heads in grief and sorrow at the thought of Jesus' brutal death. We have waited in that lonely darkness in the void of Christ's absence. All of that gets us here to this day, the day that our greatest hopes and the most good of all good news has arrived at our doorsteps. Jesus is no longer dead, but he has risen. Greed and evil do not have the final say in this story. It is the revolutionary love of Jesus that shines triumphantly through in the final chapter. The promised resurrection has happened, confirmed in the empty tomb. The good news is here. So if we look through the Easter story, you would think you're about to look at a story where, Jesus' friends have been anxiously awaiting this day. They're excited, they're happy, they're ready to celebrate. But as we heard Sarah just read for us, that's not quite how it happens. There are no shouts of joy, there are no cries of celebration, there are no words of praise. The group of women, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and others, are the first to discover the empty tomb, and they are not overjoyed, but they are frightened and confused. But why would they be so hesitant to believe the best case scenario here had come true? After all they've been through, the miracles they've witnessed, they've seen sick people healed, dead people come back to life. Why would it be so hard to believe that Jesus too had risen? Why were they looking for the living among the dead? There's so much about the experience of Jesus and his followers and his friends that we will never be able to fully comprehend. But there are certain emotional elements in what they experience that are universal to all of us. Every one of us, no matter where we've been and what we've experienced, knows what it feels like to feel loss and pain and grief. And that is what they have felt in the days and moments leading up to this resurrection. We have all experienced those times in our lives where it feels like we are just taking hit after hit after hit. We have all gone through and maybe are currently going through times of loss, stress, despair, and uncertainty. We've all experienced those times in our lives where it feels like we can't handle much more loss. We might yearn for good news, but maybe out of protection for ourselves and maybe just in our own feelings of bitterness and sadness, we cannot allow ourselves to hope for it. This is a phenomenon that not only takes place in our personal lives, but it also kind of reflects our sentiment towards the world. We are constantly reminded of the ways the world is a mess. We are constantly reminded of the ways that our neighbors and our communities are suffering. We hear of another senseless act of violence, another needless war claims innocent lives, more pollution making the very air we breathe dangerous. The most rational decision in the midst of all of this might be giving up hope and giving in to cynicism and accepting defeat. So like so many women in the Bible, we know very few details about a lot of the individual women who discover the empty tomb that day. But we might be able to imagine, like so many of the people who stood beside Jesus' side up until his last agonizing breath, that they come to this tomb with a specific type of grief and loss that would be hard for the average person to even imagine. They have lost their beloved friend and leader in the most horrific way possible. Their community is being threatened and torn apart. After having witnessed what this community has witnessed in the last few days, after having experienced what they've experienced, it's not so hard to blame them for not being on the lookout for good news, even when it's right in front of their faces. So why would they be looking for the living among the dead? And in their moment of confusion and panic, the women are informed that their friend, his body is no longer there, for he has risen just as he told them that he would. And it all starts coming back to them. So they go and they need to inform the rest of their community of this good news. Well, who can be terribly surprised that when they go to the group of male disciples, they don't listen to them and they don't take them seriously. The text tells us that the women's words to the disciples, they seem like an idle tale and they do not believe them. The disciples, they choose to react out of their pain and out of their cynicism. They're so confident in the worst case scenario that they don't even want to bother going to the tomb at all. All of them are in doubt and disbelief. All of them except for our friend Peter. As many of you know, we have been on quite the journey with Peter through the last few weeks of our Lenten season, experiencing so much of Christ's story through his eyes and his perspective. And it's safe to assume that Peter, at this point in the story, having just denied his friend Jesus 3 times at his most vulnerable moment, having been absent to Jesus in his final darkest moments, it's safe to assume that he would have been at a pretty low point. It would be a reasonable prediction to think that Peter would have had the most reason to give in to hopelessness and despair. It would have been understandable if Peter had been too burdened by his own regret and his shame to have been able to believe in a better outcome. But inexplicably, after all that he's done and all that he has experienced, Peter chooses to run towards hope, even when it feels like the story that he's being told might be way too good to be true. Peter runs to the tomb and looks in to see that there is no body to be found. There's only the linen cloth which once held Jesus' body. He goes home in awe and amazement. But Jesus had told them in Galilee that he would one day die and rise again. So why is it so hard for them to believe this now in this moment? Why do his friends all go looking for the living among the dead? I mean, I think we have to admit the world some days really has a way of trying to suck the hope out of us, doesn't it? Some days we wake up and we feel like we're just fighting the same devastating problems over and over again. It feels a lot easier to identify with the mood and the attitudes of Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, and it's like, when is Resurrection Day ever going to come? When all feels lost and hopeless, we protect ourselves by giving up hope and always expecting the worst case scenario to be true. We become the women at the tomb who are frightened and confused at the absence of Jesus' body. We become like the disciples who are so sure that no good news is coming that they just don't go to the tomb at all. However, as we now have been through so much of this journey with Peter, we might be able to find a little bit of inspiration in this very dumbfounded hope and optimism that he displays in this story. As much as it might be easy to blame and judge Peter for his actions leading up to the resurrection, the truth is, I think we can all find a little bit of ourselves in him as well. Peter's story is one that is full of mistakes and failures, of hurt and disappointment, but it is also a story of triumph and redemption. Despite his grief and his shame, he runs to the empty tomb to find the risen Christ who will offer him forgiveness and a renewed sense of purpose. Hope comes to Peter in his lowest moment. Hope comes to Peter in the moments he should least expect it. Now, it is understandable when we feel hopeless. But if we lean into this hopelessness too often, we constantly catch ourselves trying to look for the living among the dead. We get caught in these moments where good news is right in front of our eyes, desperately trying to show itself to us, and we are not able to see it. In the world we live in, the pain that we witness and the grief that we experience in our lives, what does it mean to be hopeful in the face of all of that? Is it dangerous or is it naive to feel hope and optimism in spite of everything? Does our hopefulness, is it insensitive? Does it ignore the realities of our situation? Does it gloss over the real problems that we all face? There's this analogy of pastoral leadership that I learned about in seminary called the wise fool, which I think speaks to the type of faith that we speak about this morning. The wise fool is someone who remains hopeful in the face of all the facts and the situations that tells them it is much more logical to feel otherwise. But the wise fool does not maintain hope because she is ignorant to her surroundings or doesn't appreciate the seriousness of her reality. She remains loyal to the underdog causes, not because she's so sure it's going to work out, but because she believes in them and knows that it's the right thing to do. She is both wise enough to see that the odds may be stacked against her, but foolish enough to try anyways. She finds a way to believe in resurrection, even if up to this point she has only experienced death. God is calling us in this story to be hopeful in a world that can feel very hopeless. God is calling us to have hope in the seemingly impossible best outcome, but not in a way that ignores or glosses over the pain that we feel. When Jesus' community does eventually rejoice at their friend's return, it does not take away from the pain and trauma that they experience at the hands of his death. It does not take away or ignore the fear and uncertainty that still haunts their community. I don't know where each of you are today in your journey of hopefulness. Maybe you are here today ready to see and hear proof of good news. Maybe you sit here today still in the depths of your despair. Maybe you come here ready to start the healing process, ready to open your eyes to signs of hope, but are not really sure where to start. Peter might serve as a great model for how we can balance our doubts and our hopefulness together. He hears the women's story and he goes running to the tomb to see for himself if the good news might actually be true. He displays a great show of faith in this moment, but that does not mean he was completely without doubt or cynicism. Being hopeful does not mean that all of our doubts, fear, and shame have suddenly disappeared. Sometimes being hopeful means having all those feelings of disbelief and running towards the tomb anyways, even when it might seem like the most delusional and illogical thing you could be doing. Metro, on this Easter Sunday, my invitation for you is to feel however it is you are feeling today. If you are deep in your despair, that's okay. If you are at the peak of your joy and celebration, allow yourself to stay there. Whatever it is that you feel, do not let it be all-consuming so much that it blocks your vision of the good news. Because despite it all, there is good news in this story, and there is good news in our lives as well. We ask God today for wisdom, comfort, and guidance as we run or walk or begrudgingly drag our feet to the empty tomb. May we not be so overburdened and overwhelmed with our grief that we catch ourselves always looking for the living among the dead. May we remember, no matter how lost and doubtful we feel, we are loved and we are guided by a God who does not allow hatefulness and evil to have the final word. May we remember that we are loved and known by a God who, even in the times when it feels like everything is falling apart, that God gives us glimmers of hope and a better world to come. On this Easter Sunday, may we find the ultimate good news in Jesus' triumph over the absolute worst that the world had to offer. May we know that there is good news even in the midst of our own pain and suffering. May we feel encouraged today for a better life for ourselves and a better reality for our world, knowing that when we allow ourselves to give in to hopelessness, we ignore the empty tomb and we go looking for the living among the dead. Have faith today, Metro, that even if the better world we hope for feels very unlikely and out of reach, we still hope for it. Because a world that we believe is possible, one that is free of much of the pain and injustice that we know today too well, if we believe that world is possible, that is a world that we will choose to fight for. Pain, suffering, and death might always exist, but Jesus reminds us that they will not get to have the final say. This morning I commit, as Peter did, to cautiously but enthusiastically explore that empty tomb that is full of good news. And it is my greatest hope, my community here at Metro, that you'll come with me. Amen.